webinars. Do you guys see the attendee box on your screen too? Okay. So it's really interesting. It just kind of pours people into the meeting. But not all at once. So you have to wait. I guess this is what the president does when she's waiting for the people coming in to slow down. They're usually in line already, and she just has to let the system let them all in. So Greg.
Yes, Mike.
Would you consider standing in on the intro?
I know Kirsty's prepared it, and she has Miriam's CV in front of her.
Okay, got it.
I've just found Kirsty. She was in the other room, so I just let her in.
Oh, thank you. Good move, Lynn. Seems like the obvious thing.
Kirsty, you're muted. I think you're talking.
Apologies, it wouldn't let me in. So
yeah, so sorry. We should have checked that earlier. It's obvious that was what was going on.
It just wasn't. It was just kind of spinning and spinning. But I am here now.
Okay. Well, good. Lynn, have you got a spotlight you can put on Kirsty, and I'll do a quick hi, Kirsty.
Hi, and let me know when you're ready for me to start my introduction.
Okay, good. Just got a few words for the students in the class in KSC 199. All of you have been in for more than a week, so you've all seen the syllabus and you all are versed in the expectations and know how to know the drills and everything like that. I've started putting attendance up on the Canvas site. Take a look, make sure that I'm doing that correctly. Again, as you all know, it's a random audit through the talk on camera, with camera on, I should say, and that students and the rest of us as panelists are invited guests. If you're a panelist, you've got an active camera and you've got a microphone that turns on, and you can ask questions of the panelist at the end. If you're an attendee, you can see the presentation, but you cannot talk. If you've got a question for the panelist at the end, please put it in the Q&A, and Lynn Arnold and I will pick up on that and make sure that it gets asked. And tonight, this is our third talk of the semester. I'm really excited. We got a guest from the School of Arts, Education, and Humanities. And to introduce our guest tonight is Kirsty Sandy, the Dean of the School of the Arts, Education, and Humanities. And I'll hand it to you, Kirsty, and then I will take back over when the talk is over to make sure that Meriem gets all of her questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor Pagès, for presenting tonight. You all know the topic of tonight's talk, but I'm going to talk a little bit about our speaker and introduce her to you. In the popular imagination, the Middle Ages evoke images of knights, castles, dragons, and Game of Thrones style violence. Taking a look at the research of Professor Meriem Pagès, one sees that while those perceptions cover some of what one encounters when studying the time period, they certainly don't capture all of it. Professor Pagès has been interested in the Middle Ages since her days as an undergraduate at Mount Holyoke, not too far from here. And probably long before that, this is my guess, I'm sure this goes back to her childhood because she has loved this subject area for many years. So for all of you students out there who are saying, oh, well, most people don't decide what they want to do, I think she probably decided pretty early on. Her primary area of expertise is the image of Islam in medieval Europe. Her first book, From Martyr to Murderer, Representations of the Assassins in 12th and 13th Century Europe, published by Syracuse University Press in 2014, looked at a sect known for political assassinations and how this group complicated medieval Europe's notions of a monolithic Islam. Since its publication, Professor Pagès it's unbelievable how much she has done. She has co-edited a collection on the Middle Ages and popular culture and another collection on art and violence in the Middle Ages. She has one book chapter forthcoming and one under contract, one focusing on saintly women and another on representations of medieval women as other in film. Her most recent book is under contract at Arc Humanities Press and called Chaucer and Becket's Saracen Mother, The Man of Law's Tale and Race in the Middle Ages, looking at the concept of race in the Middle Ages. And that just covers her scholarship. I also want to add here that Professor Pagès is a favorite professor among English majors at Keene State. When I was English chair, her classes were so popular. Students find her classes challenging, engaging, and fun. They are sometimes surprised by this themselves. They don't think the Middle Ages could be fun, and they are pleasantly surprised by her classes. Yes, you might be wondering this. She does show Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I know my office is near her classroom sometimes, and I know that she does this, but only as an object of study, not for enjoyment. She was instrumental in bringing the annual Medieval and Renaissance Forum, formerly at Plymouth State, to our campus now. Every year it is held here. In fact, they have a dinner where you don't use cutlery at all, although I did sneak down to the dining commons and stole some plastic cutlery. And there's also sometimes a sword fighting workshop. So there's all sorts of fun things happening, as well as, of course, the scholarly presentations that occur. Her interest in supporting student research led her to her position here as the director of the Center for Creative Inquiry at Keene State. So she's very supportive of student research. So if you're in her class, she's going to be really encouraging you to do your own research and supporting in that. None of us is quite sure how she does all of this. In addition to being an active scholar, an impressive teacher, advisor, and the director of CCI, she's a mother to 2 young boys, Georgie and Robbie, and you may meet them tonight, or maybe she's warned me, hear them tonight in the background. They're very active. I welcome you all to Dr. Pagès' talk tonight titled Conversion, Race, and Racialization in Late Medieval England. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. That was incredible. That was so kind of you, and there's no way I'm going to live up to that. I do have to say that there's evidence of my kids in the background, but they themselves are gone. They have been taken to Starbucks an ungodly hour. So I have the house to myself, which is kind of amazing. If you're a parent, you know that's kind of great, especially during COVID. So thank you so much, Kirsty. That was ridiculously kind of you to give me that amazing intro, which I absolutely did not deserve. Thank you so much. Some of you have heard this afternoon because I know Sierra and maybe someone else from my class is here, and I feel like this talk's been hyped up so much, and I am so sorry. I feel like I'm going to disappoint everyone, but I'm going to start because I don't want to go on. I will go on probably for too long, and because I do love this stuff, which is really geeky of me, I know. So I probably will go on too long, and I want to make sure that you all go on to the next, whatever is next for you, and I don't take you too much of your time. And the last thing that I'll say before I start reading is just that this is the first chapter of this book project that I've been working on. And actually one thing that I am really proud of is that I managed to do this during COVID, which feels like kind of an accomplishment because it's been crazy. It's been such a crazy year, but I did try to put together this book project during COVID. And so this is the first chapter, and it's a chapter that really doesn't talk at all about the Man of Law's Tale and the legend about Thomas Becket's Muslim mother. And if anyone's interested, I would love to talk about that, but I thought that it would be a little bit easier to digest my first chapter, which is the chapter where I kind of try to give a literary contextualization to the issues that I deal with in the later chapters that really do focus on the legend and on the Man of Law's Tale from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So I'll be happy to talk more about that later on. And in fact, I feel like I raise a lot of interesting debates and questions, not my own, but other people's questions and debates in this talk, and I just kind of like flip from one thing to another, and I don't really address anything in depth. So if anyone has more questions, I'd really love to try to address them. I probably won't have any answers, but I'd love to try. And And the last thing, really the last thing that I'll say, introduction, is that I do have a PowerPoint, and it's a very basic kind of PowerPoint. And what I've done is I've tried to kind of give some information that I'm not giving in my talk about the 4 texts that I talk about in the PowerPoint. And so I'm hoping, I'm going to screen share, and then, or maybe I'll wait a little bit. I'll give the introduction and then I'll start screen sharing once I've turned to the 4 texts that I'm looking at. Thank you so much. Sorry about this long preamble. And again, thank you so much, Kirsty. And thank you, Mike, and everyone for having me here tonight. It's really an honor. Thank you so much. So I guess I'll start with my title again: Conversion, Race, and Racialization in Late Medieval England. Not surprisingly, conversion plays an important role in most medieval works dealing with the interaction between Christendom and the other. Be it the conversion of a beautiful heathen woman who has fallen in love with the Christian hero, the baptism of a warrior whose defeat in single combat convinces him of the truth of Christianity, or even the failure of a villainous sultan to recognize the need to convert, conversion, either through its presence or its absence, always signifies momentously in these narratives, often occurring at a climactic moment in the work. If conversion is crucial to the development of medieval stories dealing with the other, it is also a source of tension, however. As much as Latin Christian authors and audiences enjoyed imagining heathen characters turning to the Christian faith, they also feared the possibility that these same individuals might betray their new faith and their new co-religionists. In Black Legacies, Race in the European Middle Ages, Lynn Ramy repeatedly notes that, quote, converts are surrounded by a miasma of doubt about the efficacy or completeness of their conversions. End quote. What if the new convert was not sincere in his or her intentions? What if conversion was deployed as a tool to manipulate Christian forces into surrender or defeat? These questions plague numerous works from the 12th century onwards. Such questions and the narratives that raise them are at the heart of the debate about race in the Middle Ages, a debate inspired largely by Geraldine Heng. In her groundbreaking study from 2003, I believe, Empire of Magic, Medieval Romance and the Politics of Cultural Fantasy, Heng recast medieval romance as a nation-building tool, a genre conceived in the trauma of the First Crusade. Here, Heng examines the ways in which romance both supports dominant power structures and hierarchies, for example, by privileging the knightly class over archers, while establishing a proto-nationalistic English identity through setting up various others as negative foils. It is in describing this process that Heng first articulates the concept of race religion, a term that redefines race as determined not only through biology, but also through culture and religion. Heng further elaborates on the concept of race religion and the medieval roots of racism in the invention of race in the European Middle Ages, providing a detailed analysis of the racialization of Jews in England in the 12th and 13th centuries, before turning to the treatment of other groups, Africans, Muslims, Mongols, Native Americans, and Romani, in late medieval Europe. I'll try to slow down, sorry. Throughout her significant body of work, Heng disrupts medievalists' tendency to repress uncomfortable passages in medieval works by relegating the origins of race to the early modern period, which is the standard accepted notion about race, that it emerges in the early modern period. Heng's adoption of the term race to discuss medieval European prejudices against marginalized communities is instrumental to achieving this end. Early on in the invention of race, Heng highlights that search terminology provides access to tools otherwise not available to medieval scholars. Using the vocabulary of modern racial discourse renders the issues in texts under discussion much more pressing and calls our attention to medieval European intolerance in a way that other terms, more conventionally used to study the representation of the other in medieval Europe, do not. Words such as anti-Judaism and anti-Muslim safely distance us from the Middle Ages. By contrast, race is loaded with meaning that resonates intimately with modern readers. Is that better? Am I going a little bit slower? Okay. Want to make sure that I don't take too much time. That's my problem. Following in Heng's footsteps, my goal tonight is to examine one very specific moment in the development of late medieval English literature, when fascination for the other, and I'm focusing specifically on the Muslim other, as Dr. Sandy was saying, that's my area of specialization, and anxiety over the question of conversion competed for dominance in works focusing on interaction with the Muslim world. To explore this episode in medieval English literary history, I discuss texts that highlight individual journeys, potential or realized, from one religion to another. These narratives reveal fear of Christian conversion to the Saracen faith and emphasize implicitly or explicitly the possible failure of the other's conversion to Christianity. At the same time that these pieces display an increasing interest in something beginning to resemble the modern concept of race, they also spend much time and energy imagining potential transitions from one race religion to another, to use Hang's term. In the next few minutes, I will look especially closely at how anxiety about conversion in late medieval English texts manifests itself in concern with sociocultural factors such as dress, customs, and language, both before and after conversion to Christianity. To do so, I trace the evolution of the treatment of the other, again, especially the Muslim other, in 4 different high, that just means 12th and 13th century, and late, which means 14th century and later, medieval texts, looking at 3 different stages on the path to conversion. 1, how difference is inscribed in the text. 2, the manner in which anxiety over the conversion of the other manifests itself in the text. And 3, whether and how the text displays any anxiety over the new convert's assimilation after baptism. I begin with that most ubiquitous of medieval texts, the Chanson de Roland, or Song of Roland in English. And Sierra, I know you're there somewhere. We're just discussing it this afternoon, and you were raising great questions about it. Before exploring a later 12th century French narrative, the Prise d'Orange, or Conquest of Orange, both of which, to varying degrees, associate the Saracen other with blackness and display unease about Saracens claiming to seek baptism. In the second half of this paper, I turned to 2 late Middle English poems, The King of Tars and Beavis of Hampton. These 2 pieces place more emphasis than the 2 12th century French chansons de geste on the risks inherent to conversion. While The King of Tars suggests that conversion can pose a threat to the Christian community by allowing Christians to convert to other faiths, Beavis of Hampton further investigates this dangerous possibility. Perhaps even more importantly, Beavis of Hampton reveals that assimilation does not necessarily follow upon conversion, and that baptism is only one of many necessary changes that herald a new beginning for converts and their new community. Dress, ritual, and language are factors that become increasingly significant in delineating Christians from non-Christians, from the Chanson de Roland, Song of Roland, to Beavis of Hampton, from early 12th century France to 14th century England. And the kind of language and dress attributed to a character comes to play a role that is complementary, if not equal sometimes, to baptism in assessing his or her place in Christian society. Perhaps the most famous of chansons de geste, the early 12th century or late 11th century, depending where you stand on the debate about date, Song of Roland provides an intriguing example of an early work treating difference and conversion. And here I am going to try to screen share. Yeah, sorry, apologies for my lack of technical abilities. There we go. Okay. That's my first slide with a very bad picture. So I'm just going to go through these slides. And again, I'm just providing some information about these texts that I'm looking at in these slides and hoping that makes the text a little bit less mysterious to people who might not know anything about them, which is probably a fair number of people tonight. So this is a slide about the Song of Roland, just some basic information, and oops, sorry. And then a picture, and then pagans are wrong and Christians are right is a phrase that's repeated numerous times in the poem. And there's a brief plot summary. It's very bare bones. And then I'll get on to Brahmimonda. So I'll try to kind of remember to skip through so that you can kind of see this as I go along, and then I'll do the same with the other works. The Song of Roland both remarks upon difference and approaches the possibility of Saracen conversion to Christianity with apprehension. Difference is noted briefly in the description of Frankish and Saracen troops. And another note, I'm going to use this term Saracen from now on. Saracen is the term that is usually used to denote Muslims in the Middle Ages in medieval European texts. It is a text that it is a term that is problematic in its own way, but I'm trying to use it only when the text really actually does use it. And the Song of Roland uses the term pagan to refer to Muslim, but it also uses the term Saracen, and Saracen is slightly more specific and really kind of tending to mean more Muslims. So Saracen equals Muslim from now on. While the Franks hail from various parts of Western Europe, they are implicitly presented as white-skinned. In contrast, a few of the Saracen troops are explicitly described as dark-skinned, their blackness viewed as a signifier of evil as well as paramount ugliness. When Roland notices a group of Black Saracens approaching towards him, the very sight of blackness assures him that he is about to die. And here I have the one quote that I'm quoting from the Song of Roland, and I managed to fit both the Old French on it and the translation, which is not my translation, but the most important translators' translation of that quote. And as you can see, when Roland sees the accursed people who are blacker than ink and whose teeth alone are white, the Count said, "Now I know for certain that today we shall surely die. Strike, Frenchmen, for I am attacking again." Paul Gilbert Lewis notes that such passages cannot help but recall illustrations of modern racism. Uncomfortable as these moments are, however, it is important to note that the equation between blackness and evil found in Song of Roland does not necessarily imply a modern racist ideology describing blackness as a signifier of intellectual and social inferiority. Geraldine Heng emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between different kinds of blackness in medieval literature. Quote, "In contemplating epidermal race, it is thus useful to recognize a distinction between hermeneutic blackness, in which exegetical considerations are paramount and often explicitly foregrounded, and physiognomic blackness linked to the characterization of Black Africans in phenomena that extended beyond immediate theological exegesis." End quote. The representation of Black Saracens in the Song of Roland and the extremely negative description of Black Saracen troops may be read as exemplifying Hang's concept of hermeneutic blackness, in which individuals are painted black and described pejoratively as a way to underscore their sinfulness and lack of virtue. Aside from the ambiguous meaning of blackness in the Song of Roland, the difference the Black Saracen troops embody also plays a very minor role in the poem. If anything, as Sharon Kinoshita notes, quote, "Each camp, as critics inevitably note, is in fact a mirror image of the other," end quote. Just discussing this with my class, and I know that some people have a different idea about this, so I hope that you will disagree with me next time we meet. Both Christian and Saracen leaders hold council with their barons at the beginning of the poem. Both groups privilege 12 warriors that surpass all of their companions. Christians and Saracens use similar calls when charging into battle. The list goes on and on. As Kinoshita shows in Pagans Are Wrong and Christians Are Right, Alterity, Gender, and Nation in the Chanson de Roland, there is in fact far too much similarity and likeness between Christians and Saracens in the Chanson de Roland. The only true difference dividing the two camps, and it is a crucial one, being faith. Thus, it seems that blackness as difference is introduced only to be subsumed under the far more significant element of the Saracens' alien faith. Hang's label, hermeneutic blackness, seems most appropriate in approaching those few Saracen troops described as black, their skin color meant to confirm the evil of the Saracen religion and by implication the truths of Christianity. As for Christian anxiety about conversion, the issue initially appears central to the work. The first 15 lays or stanzas of the poem deal with the Saracen king Marsilla's attempt to deceive Charlemagne by promising to embrace Christianity as soon as the emperor has left Spain, which is just so clearly a trick. Of course, the king's projected conversion never comes to fruition, and Marsilla's false promises mutate into armed combat between Christians and Saracens. However, the conflict is overshadowed by the deception of the Christian baron Ganelon, and it is the trial of Ganelon that occupies the rest of the poem. The text's initial focus on the dangers inherent to the conversion of the other to Christianity thus turns in some ways into a red herring. One conversion does take place in the Song of Roland, that of Marsilla's queen, Bramimonda. As the tale of Roland's bravery and Ganelon's treachery unfold, the audience bears witness to Bramimonda's gradual renunciation of the Saracen faith. For this pivotal character, the need to convert arises out of the powerlessness of the Saracen idols, deaf to her pleas for help. At the very end of the narrative, Charlemagne acknowledges that Bramimonda needs to be taught Christianity, presumably to convert for positive as well as negative reasons. Bramimonda must embrace Christianity on its own merits rather than simply to evade the false gods of the Saracens that have failed her. For this, Charlemagne plans to have her converted through love, a goal the bishops of France hope to accomplish through the intermediary of noble godmothers who will instruct the Queen of Spain about her new faith. This last detail not only sets Brahmamonda's conversion against that of her subjects, forced to choose between baptism and death, but also hints at the possibility that gender plays a role in the treatment of the Saracen queen. Although Brahmamonda seeks baptism of her own free will, she needs to be feminized. At the court of Marcella, she has played a masculine role. She is, for instance, an active participant in the negotiations of Ganelon's betrayal at the opening of the poem. And Charlemagne both acknowledges and attempts to rectify Brahmamonda's lack of proper gender performance by tacitly agreeing that it will be godmothers who will instruct the queen about her new faith. In Pagans Are Wrong and Christians Are Right, Kinoshita compellingly argues against treating the Song of Roland as a masculine warrior epic by emphasizing the crucial role played by Brahmamonda. Rather than relegating the women of the Song of Roland to the margins of the story, Kinoshita advocates that the women serve as the only site of difference between Christians and Saracens, allowing audiences to distinguish between the two groups when the two in fact share so much that their lack of difference might otherwise cause unease. In the end, it is Brahmamonda's baptism that serves as the climactic event of the poem. The text does not allow any room for speculation about Brahmamonda's place in Frankish society once she has converted, and we are left to assume that assimilation into Latin Christendom will follow immediately upon conversion. Where the poem opened on deep anxieties about Saracen conversion to Christianity, it ends with a complete lack of concern for Brahmamonda's assimilation into Frankish society after baptism. Rather, we are to take for granted that the Saracen queen will simply vanish to be replaced immediately and fully by a Christian noblewoman. In the Prise d'Orange, or the Conquest of Orange, composed around the middle of the 12th century, difference is marked much more strongly than in the Chanson de Roland. Song of Roland, sorry. As with the earlier work, the Saracen villains look different from the Christian heroes. Unlike in the Song of Roland, however, physical difference, once again equated primarily with blackness, does not simply appear on a few of the Saracen battalions. Rather, blackness constitutes one of two primary markers of the Saracen faith in the Conquest of Orange and serves to distinguish Christians from Saracens. As a result, much emphasis is placed on the need for Guillaume, the text hero, and his man to paint their faces black in order to pass as Saracens. Picture, and that's a little bit of a summary of the Conquest of Orange. And I'm sorry, I got a little kind of punchy with some of my title headings, so they're supposed to be funny. They might be just a little nerdy, sorry. But you get a little bit of a description of what happens in this story, and it's really kind of wild. Very wild. The Christians succeed in deceiving the Saracens until a tunic of gold is flung at Guillaume's face, removing the black dye and really revealing him to be white. Although the differentiation of Christians from Saracens along color lines hints at the racialization of both groups in the poem, the Saracens' blackness again appears rooted in a hermeneutic approach to the other. Guillaume's blackface performance suggests that the text's narrative logic is based on the belief that Saracens are black and evil and Christians white and good. According to this interpretation, the seemingly essential blackness of William's Saracen foe reflects their sins and evil nature rather than marking them racially. The Saracens' blackness and the sins and negative attributes that blackness connotes reflect the lack of divine grace in their lives, a physical indicator of their spiritual deficiency. And of course, that's very problematic in itself. Likewise, the fact that the Saracen princess Horrible, the work's heroine and Guillaume's lover, is white reinforces the argument that skin color reflects a character's inner virtue, or lack thereof, in the chanson. Jacqueline de Wever and Lynn Ramy have both remarked on Horrible's white skin, de Wever arguing that the color of her skin, quote, nullifies Horrible's alterity, unquote, and Ramy stating that Horrible's whiteness renders her suspicious to the Saracens even before her betrayal of her kin on behalf of Guillaume and his companions. Valentina Jones Wagner makes a larger argument that the potential for conversion is inscribed on the body of the white Saracen princess. Unlike the other Saracens, Horrible's whiteness signals her readiness to adopt Christianity. Skin color, then, performs a symbolic function in the Conquest of Orange, both illustrating inherent virtue and emphasizing a character's capacity to embrace the one true faith, Christianity. Unlike in the Song of Roland, however, skin color is not the only distinguishing factor between Christians and Saracens in the conquest of Orange, and language is portrayed as an important secondary factor in distinguishing between the two groups. The essential nature of language in differentiating one group from another becomes apparent as Guillaume prepares to infiltrate Orange. Knowing that one of his men, Gilbert, learned the Saracen language during his long captivity at the hands of the enemy, he coaxes and wheedles Gilbert into accompanying him on his foray into Orange to try and capture the city and win Orable's love. If language is important in determining whether one belongs in the Christian or the Saracen camp, however, the text is somewhat inconsistent in highlighting the linguistic difference separating Christian heroes from Saracen foes. When Guillaume and his two companions, Gilbert and Guiela, first arrive in Orange, we are reminded that only Gilbert can speak both languages when he is sent to speak to the porter alone. Later, however, the Saracen prince Aragon, Orable's stepson, engages in direct communication with Guillaume as if there existed no language barrier between the two men. Yet when Guillaume finally meets Orable, she tells him that she is, quote, first in your tongue, end quote, perhaps the further to underscore her ability to transgress the boundaries of her birth community and assimilate into a new socio-religious system. Despite, or perhaps because of, the existence of not one, but two clear markers of difference in the conquest of Orange, the narrative betrays much more anxiety about conversion than does the Song of Roland. Even though Orable arms Guillaume and his two companions, Gilbert and Guiela, Guiela immediately jumps to the conclusion that Orable has betrayed them when Aragon attacks the three Christian men. Guillaume himself echoes Guiela's suspicions about the white multilingual queen less than 200 lines later. Even more interesting, perhaps, is the fear voiced about Gilbert at the end of the narrative, when Gilbert has to lead Guillaume's nephew Bertrand through a secret cave and tunnel so as to facilitate the rescue of Guillaume, Guiela, and Orable and allow for the Christian capture of Orange. Because Gilbert leads Bertrand and his man through dark, hidden passageways, the latter concludes that Gilbert has reneged his Christian faith and betrayed his former companions. These three instances in which the text articulates fear about conversion in the conquest of Orange are especially enlightening in the manner in which they diverge from the anxieties about conversion expressed at the very beginning of the Song of Roland, where the primary concern about the conversion of the other to Christianity in the Song of Roland lies in the suspicion that the Saracens could use conversion as a tool to manipulate Charlemagne and his men. The conquest of Orange reveals anxiety not only about the sincerity of a new convert's faith, but also about a captive's potential to renounce his community of origin and turn to the face of its captors. In the conquest of Orange, conversion is perceived as a double-edged sword, one that can be used against Christians and lead to betrayal in a number of different ways. In the end, however, all fears are cast aside as the conquest of Orange concludes with the baptism of Orable and her marriage to Guillaume. Once again, we're left with the image of a baptized woman for whom assimilation into the Christian community is not an issue for concern. In spite of a heightened sense of difference between Saracens and Christians and a lingering fear of betrayal by those like Orable and Gilbert, who can move back and forth between worlds, languages, and cultures, the conquest of Orange ends with a clear affirmation of Christian dominance, one that asserts the power of the Christian community to mold and reshape the Saracen Orable into a Christian woman. Unlike Bramimonde and Orable, the woman who converts at the beginning of the King of Tars is a Christian princess forced to convert to the Saracen law. And after initially rejecting both conversion and marriage to the Sultan of Damascus, the daughter of the King of Tars finally accepts to wed the Sultan when the latter defeats her father in battle. When she arrives in Damascus, the princess is immediately attired in new clothing. In the oldest manuscript of the text that has been preserved from about 1330, the princess's change of clothing signals a seemingly profound change of identity. And this is the first quote, and I'll just read the translation. Into a chamber she was led, and richly she was clad like heathen women. The princess's new costume symbolizes her apparent acceptance of her new life and belief system. And when the Sultan asks her if she will convert to his law, she states her intention to do so. Sir, I will not grieve you. Teach me now and let me hear how I shall make my prayer when I believe in them. On Muhammad I shall rely, and Jesus Christ my Lord forsake, who made Adam and Eve. And from then on I will serve you at will, early and late, loudly and quietly, in the morning and in the evening. In this startling declaration, the princess does not merely suggest herself to be open to the possibility of conversion to the Sultan's faith, but rather assures him that she will reject Christianity. Here too, attention is given to the more practical aspects of conversion. Although the princess's statement concludes with more general and sweeping renunciation of Christianity, it begins with a request to the Sultan to teach her how to pray. This opening plea, insincere as it might be, points to an interest in the practical sociocultural facets of conversion. How can an individual who has not been raised into his or her new faith know how to make mi prayer when ich an hem beleve? Make my prayer when I believe in them. The princess continues to observe her husband's Saracen faith publicly until she gives birth to a child described simply as an insensate lump of flesh. And I had taught a class on this text once, and my students dubbed the rond de flesh the blob, and so that stuck with me. So that's how I ended up with this title for the summary slide. After the baptism and immediate transformation of the princess's newborn into a beautiful male heir, of course, male heir, the Sultan acknowledges the power and superiority of Christianity, and the false conversion of the beginning is paralleled with a much more positive conversion of the Sultan. Before accepting Christian baptism, the Sultan goes through a journey similar to that of Bramimonde in the Chanson de Roland, begging assistance from his idols before denigrating them for refusing to breathe life into his child. If the son of the Princess of Tars enjoys a double transformation, the shapeless lump becoming a beautiful, well-shaped child at the moment of his baptism, so does the Sultan, who undergoes a similar physical as well as a spiritual transformation upon embracing the Christian faith. Prior to the Sultan's baptism, the only physical description given of him occurs upon the princess's arrival at his court. While his bride dons luxurious Saracen clothes, the Sultan himself serves as their negative foil, and he is described as so foul a mate, for the beautiful, virtuous princess. What that foulness entails, however, remains a mystery until the Sultan becomes receptive to the truths of Christianity. As he renounces his idols and witnesses the radical transformation of his child upon baptism, we finally learn that the Sultan is in fact Black. Less than 150 lines later, the Sultan himself received baptism. We are then given more details about his appearance, current and previous, and then there's that whopper of a quote: his skin that was black and loathly became all white through God's grace and pure without flaw. The blackness of the Sultan of Damascus' skin is thus not only presented as unappealing and ugly, foul in fact, but is also associated with his hostility towards Christianity and Christian believers, and therefore his lack of virtue and the sinfulness of his existence. The equation between white skin and spiritual virtue is further emphasized by the fact that the simple act of baptism has the immediate and unalloyed power to transform the Sultan from being both foul in appearance and lacking in essential virtues into a white man, klere withouten blame. Once again, we are presented with a blackness that is primarily hermeneutic rather than physiognomic, but this is all kind of starting to add up now. In its dual concern with conversion and the distinction between believers and non-believers, the King of Tars has much in common with the conquest of Orange. Just as in the earlier work, the King of Tars manifests clear and explicit anxiety about the possibility of Christians converting to the Saracen faith. As in the conquest of Orange as well, the King of Tars uses skin color to differentiate between Christians and non-Christians. Here again, the sin of the Saracen faith is inscribed upon non-Christian skin. Both texts also present conversion as consisting of a combination of sociocultural behaviors, dress in the King of Tars and language in the conquest of Orange, and skin color. To convert, individuals must not only pledge themselves to their new faith and physically show they possess inherent virtue and spiritual worth, but they must also enact the behaviors and adopt the customs of the community associated with that faith. Where the two texts diverge is in the values they assign to the modes of differentiation they privilege. Where skin color is essential in the conquest of Orange, stressing not only who possesses the virtue required to become Christian, but also foreshadowing the conversion of those Saracens deemed worthy of the Christian faith, sociocultural practices such as dress and customs dominate over skin color as a means of identification in the King of Tars. Skin color in the later work seems more of an afterthought than anything. No attention is paid to the Sultan's blackness or that of any other character in the work until that blackness is about to be erased. By contrast, the new heathenish attire of the Princess of Tars is foregrounded in the text, creating a deep unease about her spiritual state of being. If her disguise is so persuasive, to what extent can she herself resist the faith that has been thrust upon her? How long will it be before that disguise, one that signals the princess's successful ability to pass, encroaches upon her very heart and soul and turns her into a true heathen? How long, in short, can she wear the disguise without becoming the thing she's pretending to be? The anxiety surrounding the princess's false conversion points to another place of divergence between the conquest of Orange and the King of Tars. While the fear that Gilbert, another character marked as transgressive, might renege his Christian faith is only articulated at the very end of the conquest of Orange, and in passing, the King of Tars highlights the princess's problematic false conversion from the very beginning of the poem. Baptism still serves as the narrative's climactic event in the King of Tars, but conversion appears to have become a much more complicated, much more threatening possibility in the roughly 200 years since the composition of the Conquest of Orange. Another early 14th century work, the extremely popular English poem Beavis of Hampton, also deals extensively with conversion. Rather than an event, powerful and miraculous though it might be, conversion is presented as a process in Beavis of Hampton. The text explores various kinds of conversion from the Saracen faith to Christianity and vice versa. The need to explore conversion manifests itself fairly early on in Sir Beavis of Hampton. After Beavis's mother, the daughter of the King of Scotland, kills her husband and has Beavis sold into slavery, the boy is bought by the Saracen king Ermine of Armenia. And if you're wondering, no, Armenia was not Muslim in the Middle Ages, it was Christian, but our author does not seem to be aware of that, who raises him and has him knighted. The narrative conveniently skips over much of Beavis's youth in Armenia, and we next encounter him at the age of 15, having come into the possession of the horse Arundel and quite comfortable in his Saracen surroundings. Despite having received a horse and training in the art of knighthood, Beavis displays no interest in returning to England and avenging his father's death, his stated goal only a few lines earlier. Rather, Chaubain Bly Calkin has argued he, quote, acts in ways that indicate a profound assimilation into the Saracen world of the text and undermine his claim to be a model hero of medieval Western romance, end quote. In developing this argument, Calkin highlights two episodes in particular, the hero's first battle and his exchange with his cousin while serving as a messenger for Ermine to King Bradamant of Damascus. The first of these two episodes, Beavis's first battle on Christmas Day, shows that our hero has not only forgotten his need to take revenge on his mother and stepfather, but far more importantly, what it means to be Christian. In fact, his Saracen companions have to remind him that it is Christmas Day. Although they laugh at his ignorance, Beavis's Saracen fellows otherwise convey a message of religious tolerance. Unlike Saracens in other works dealing with the encounter between Latin Christendom and Islam, they do not belittle the Christian hero or assert the superiority of their faith over his. Rather, they enjoin Beavis to stay as true to his God as they are to theirs. Beavis, however, cannot grasp this message. The Saracens' words bring him shame because they remind him that he has lost his way as a Christian son dedicated to the pursuit of his father's killer. When he responds to the man who first mentioned Christmas, he evokes his father before resorting to language so aggressive that a battle quickly follows, one in which he kills every single one of his Saracen companions. This episode is strange in many ways. Beavis is amongst friends, and the words that begin the massacre of the Saracens could be read as gentle banter, if not even a light-hearted attempt on the Saracens' part to acknowledge and show their acceptance of their peers' difference. Why then must Beavis respond so aggressively? In part, I would argue the problem lies precisely in Beavis's lack of conflict in Armenia, where his Christian brethren, including his mother, treated him terribly in his native England. Beavis initially encounters nothing but love and support at Armin's court. Beavis must fight and kill Saracens at this juncture to show that he remains true to Christianity despite the allure and seduction of a world that has treated him with kindness and respect. In describing the woes of Beavis in his native land and his ease and comfort at the Saracen king's court, the poem's anonymous composer creates a situation where Beavis's conversion to the Saracen faith seems inevitable. For all of Beavis's earlier talk about his father and his desire for revenge, his Christian European upbringing seems to have receded into the background. In the words of Linda Lompris, Beavis can no longer distinguish between, quote, categories of home and not home, end quote. Beavis has learned both to pass and to enjoy passing. Life at the Saracen court of King Armin has transformed Beavis into, quote, someone who plays a part so well that he effectively becomes the part, someone, in other words, who, Hamlet-like, renders as natural that which is merely performance, end quote. In the process, Beavis seems momentarily to have lost his hold on his Christian identity, but Beavis is no renegade, and his murder of his Saracen companions on Christmas Day proves this somewhat contentious claim. This resounding affirmation of Beavis's Christian faith is undermined rather quickly by another ambiguous episode that shows Beavis to feel a little too comfortable in Armin's Saracen world. As Calkin emphasizes, the text's anxiety about Christians living in the Saracen world going native reaches its climax when Beavis, now a knight at Armin's court, meets his cousin Terry while traveling to Damascus to deliver a message to the Saracen king Bradamante. Instead of joyfully embracing his cousin, Beavis lies to Terry, telling him that he just saw Beavis hanged by the Saracens. He kills himself, basically. Here, Beavis goes a step further in enjoying his ability to pass. On the occasion of the Christmas Day battle, he desperately wanted to differentiate himself from his Saracen companions. During his encounter with Terry, on the contrary, he severs all ties with his biological European family, presumably to forge deeper bonds with his adoptive Saracen kin, especially Armin, whom he believes loves him as a brother. Yet according to Caroline Tyler, quote, the mark of passing successfully is the lack of a mark of passing, the lack of a signifier of some difference from what one seems to be. Passing, therefore, can only name the very failure of passing, an indication of a certain contradiction at its heart, an indication of the contradictions which constitute it, end quote. When Beavis succeeds in convincing Terry to cease searching for him, he has in effect erased any remaining difference between what he is and what he seems to be, thereby eliminating the last of what separated him from the Saracens, whose identity he has donned as a disguise. In order both to reassert his Christianity and to signal precisely his talent at passing, Beavis must engage in an activity that will clearly and definitely distinguish him from the Saracens. It is therefore hardly surprising that upon arriving in Damascus, Beavis immediately and for no apparent reason sets himself the task of running to the nearest mosque, killing its priest, and desecrating the Saracen gods. Clearly, Beavis's model of Christian, quote, Beavis's, quote, model of Christian heroism melds violence with distinctively non-Saracen behavior, end quote. Beavis's violent affirmation of his Christian identity is, however, too little, too late, and he quickly pays for his temporary renunciation of his Christian faith and family. After his summary execution of the Saracen religious man and his toppling of the idols at the Mosque of Damascus, Beavis heads to Bradamonte's castle to deliver Ermin's message, only to discover that the letter he has carried all the way from Armenia calls for his own death. Bradamante throws the hero into prison, binding him to a large stone and hurling him into a pit filled with snakes. As Kenneth D. Eckert has argued, the presence of snakes, and more specifically adders, at the bottom of the pit is highly charged symbolically. Beavis revealed his affection for his Saracen lord when he told Terry that he was dead, and his struggle for his life against snakes mirrors his attempt to preserve his spiritual survival after making such a disastrous mistake. Once again, we might expect the hero's trajectory to resume along familiar conventional lines. Having lost sight of his true identity after his initial journey to the Saracen world, it would make sense for Beavis to grasp the superiority of his original Christian identity. One could argue that the time has come for Beavis to embark on his return journey to Europe, one that would parallel his first coerced one, while signaling his growth into a mature character. Indeed, Beavis does appear to have learned the error of his passing days at this point in the text, and the activities in which he engages now cast him in a heroic Christian light. Upon his release from Bradamonte's prison, he kills a giant, visits the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and later defeats and kills a dragon like a new St. George. So he's checking boxes. Despite these Christian deeds, Beavis chooses to remain in the Saracen world after gaining his freedom. When he makes this decision, he articulates why he will not use his newfound freedom and mobility to return to his native land. Lord, he thought, where may I go? Where am I to go in England? No, he thought, what should I do there unless I had an army assembled to slay my stepfather? He thought that he would hurry on to the land of Armenia, to Armenia that was his death, to his lover Josiane. Beavis's announcement that he will go to Armenia rather than England allows the narrator to revert our attention to Josiane and her relationship with Beavis. Nevertheless, Beavis's immediate and categorical rejection of a possible return to England is striking. His release from Bradamonte's jail, following as it does his betrayal by an important member of his Saracen family, provides the perfect occasion to turn to Hampton. His ties with the Saracen world now severed, he is free to preoccupy himself solely with his European affairs. That he elects not to journey to England to reappropriate his land from the Emperor of Germany indicates the depth of his bond with Armin, Josiane, and other Saracens. He also almost seems to be looking for an excuse to stay in the Saracen world. Meanwhile, Josiane waits for Beavis. Josiane first states her intent to become a Christian early in the narrative, shortly after the Christmas Day battle. However, the sincerity of that announcement is undermined immediately by the fact that she has just called on Muhammad. When Beavis is treacherously held captive in Damascus, Josiane shows her true feelings about Christianity, lamenting the falsehood of Beavis and his God. Throughout this period, and indeed throughout her courtship of Beavis and her baptism, Josiane shows no predilection for Christianity, a faith she adopts simply to marry the man she loves. After her reunion with Beavis, Josiane's resistance to her new religion becomes more restrained, linked as it is to her relationship with the Saracen giant Ascopard. In her essay, Ascopard's Betrayal, A Narrative Problem, Melissa Furrow examines Ascopard's function in the text in light of his connection to Beavis. Yet I would argue that Ascopard is closest to Josiane. This is precisely because he personifies the Saracen world she has had to abandon. From the moment she first encounters Ascopard, Josiane does everything she can to keep him by her side. She pleads with Beavis to let him live when her lover defeats the giant in combat. Later, when Beavis leaves Cologne to settle his dispute with his stepfather, Josiane insists on Ascopard remaining with her. The exchange between the two lovers is especially telling with, and here's the quote, Beavis said, "My darling, my uncle Bishop Florentine and Ascopard, my good page, shall protect you from harm. Yes, as long as I have Ascopard," she said, "I dread no man. I put you in the hands of God and Holy Mary. As soon as you can, return to me." I just love the way that she says that. Meanwhile, in asserting her reliance on Ascopard, Josiane ignores the first half of Beavis' statement, namely that his uncle, the Bishop Saber Florentine, will watch over her. Josiane's own words are likewise significant. She places Beavis under the protection of God and the Virgin, but favors the very physical and very Saracen company of Ascopard herself. Her preference for Ascopard over the Bishop, the Virgin, and even God himself suggests that Josiane has not yet let go of the Saracen world. In this moment, Josiane shows that her baptism has not fully transformed her into a Christian lady. When confronted with the temporary loss of Beavis, she takes refuge not in God or in a Christian friend or relative, but in the one Saracen companion left her. I would argue that Ascopard here serves as a double to Josiane. He represents the Saracen self she has had to shed in order to obtain Beavis's love. When Ascopard inevitably betrays Josiane and captures her on behalf of her first Saracen husband, King Ivor of Montbrant, much later in the narrative, Josiane has still not fully assimilated into Latin Christian society. Even though she has, by this point in the story, married Beavis and birthed twin boys, she resorts to knowledge acquired in Armenia when she gives herself the appearance of a leper to repel her Saracen lover, privileging knowledge acquired in the Saracen world of her birth to divine Christian assistance to navigate her new perilous circumstances. As Calkin has argued, her use of such, quote, her use of such knowledge demonstrates her continuing links to her heritage, end quote. Despite having converted to Christianity and married a Christian lord, Josiane remains rooted in her Saracen customs and ways. At the same time, Josiane gives several indications of embracing her new Christian faith. The birth of Josiane's twins is particularly significant in displaying Josiane's changing attitude towards Christianity. When she goes in labor, she and Beavis are in a forest. Yet she refuses Beavis's assistance in birthing their children, invoking her female modesty and finally requesting, "And let me and Our Lady be." This passage is interesting in several different ways. First, Josiane's allusion to her female modesty, her privité, recalls an earlier episode in the romance in which Josiane is forcibly married to a local nobleman, the Earl Miles, after being left with Ascopard in Cologne, because of course Ascopard fails her. On that occasion, she uses the idea of female modesty and the very same term, privité, to deceive Miles into staying with her alone so as to kill him, thereby retaining her virginity and her hope of marrying Beavis upon his return. Likewise, Josiane's relationship to the Virgin has shifted significantly. As mentioned above, Josiane's earlier preference for the tangible presence of Ascopard over the spiritual support of Mary prior to Beavis's departure from Cologne marks her as, at the very least, uncertain about her new Christian faith. By contrast, when Josiane calls on the Virgin to help deliver her children, she appears completely sincere. Where her call on Mary in the earlier passage seemed part of an attempt to pass as a Christian woman, a clever performance meant to convince Beavis that her baptism had truly changed her beliefs, just as her allusion to her privité in her exchange with Miles served to deceive him, Josiane now refuses human aid and turns to the Virgin in this most desperate of situations. Also telling is Josiane's transformation when she finally feels free to cast off her repulsive disguise and to allow her natural beauty to return. Just as with the Sultan of Damascus and the King of Tars, Josiane undergoes a transformation that reveals the completion of her spiritual journey from a false faith in the Saracen gods to acceptance of the truth of Christianity. That she reverts to her natural state while doing so demonstrates the ambiguous place of heathen women in the medieval imaginary. Eventually, Josiane demonstrates not only the authenticity of her conversion, but also that she has fully integrated into her new Christian community. Josiane's assimilation in the feudal framework of Christian society becomes apparent in a much later episode. At the end of the poem, Beavis hears that the English King Edgar has dispossessed his cousin of his ancestral lands. A formidable battle ensues in the streets of London, and a rumor spreads that Beavis has died. When his false report reaches Josiane, she enjoins their twin sons, Guy and Miles, who I don't think is named after the guy she killed, but I know it's the same name, to avenge their father's death. In response, Guy and Miles fall on their knees and ask for their mother's blessing. The young men treat Josiane as a powerful woman worthy of respect. Josiane gives them a task and they immediately obey her, paying homage to her prior to their departure. Through her sons, Josiane is symbolically shown to possess an important place in her adoptive Christian community. At this climactic moment, it is important to note not only what Josiane does, namely use her voice to counsel her nearest male kin to take appropriate action, but also what she does not do. Unlike the earlier episode in which Ascopard betrays and kidnaps her, she does not resort to magic and lore acquired in the Saracen world. Even more significant is the fact that she does not take any action herself, but rather demands her sons do so on the family's behalf. For these reasons, I would argue that this episode illustrates that in time, Josiane becomes a proper Christian lady. In Josiane's case, assimilation does eventually follow upon conversion, but it takes years, decades even, for Josiane's intent to convert to Christianity, first stated in Armenia very early in the poem, to lead to Josiane's transformation from a Saracen princess into a Christian lady. Yet even when Josiane herself shows herself to have truly embraced Christianity and assimilated into her new Christian community, we are reminded of her non-Christian Eastern origins. When Josiane is absconded by Ascopard after calling on the Virgin and revealing her growing belief in her new faith, Beavis refers to the twin boys she has left behind as heathen. When Josiane engages when Josiane enjoins her sons to avenge their father, Guy and Miles, ride away on exotic riding beasts as if to remind the poem's audience of the non-Western provenance of Josiane and by extension her children. The narrative thus seems intent on reminding us of Josiane's original Saracen identity at the same time that it displays her transformation into a Christian lady. No matter how laborious and drawn out, Josiane's conversion journey does succeed, but such is not the case for Ascopard, whose uncommon baptism fails. Because of the intimacy Ascopard enjoys with Beavis and Josiane, Beavis's uncle, Bishop Saber Florentine of Cologne, expects that Ascopard will convert alongside Josiane. At the crucial moment, however, Ascopard refuses baptism, exclaiming, "Priest, will you drown me? The devil give you hell's pain. I am too large to be christened." That Ascopard rejects baptism is significant. First, it provides a brief moment of levity in this text. Secondly, it prepares the narrative's audience for Ascopard's betrayal of his Christian friends and his return to the Saracen world. Most importantly, perhaps, the episode of Ascopard's failed baptism speaks to the inability of some Saracens to accept baptism. As Ascopard's failed conversion hints at a racialization of the other and a narrowing of who can and cannot be allowed into the Christian fold. If Ascopard's inability to accept baptism and Josiane's continued othering long after her conversion suggests that the Saracen characters of Beavis of Hampton are racialized, their Saracen identity is centralized so as to render their alterity permanent and indelible, the narrative otherwise resists any simplistic interpretation of its representation of Christian-Saracen relations. Where a modern reader might expect the Saracen world to serve as a tool to the hero, providing shelter, comfort, and support to Beavis until such time that he can claim his inheritance and return to his rightful place in England, as Lynn Ramy has shown to be the case in several late medieval French works, Beavis never fully returns to England. On the contrary, when Beavis has finally succeeded in winning recognition and approval in his native land, he chooses to go home to the Saracen kingdom of Montbrand. In the end, then, Lemprise's categories of home and not home finally collapse in Beavis of Hampton. No longer simply passing, Beavis acknowledges that his home lies in the East and not in England. In conclusion, almost done. Baptism plays a pivotal, often climactic role in medieval works dealing with the other. However, the treatment of conversion in medieval literature evolves along specific lines from the high to late Middle Ages, again, roughly 12th to 14th centuries. The four works discussed above, The Song of Roland, The Conquest of Orange, The King of Tars, and Beavis of Hampton, provide us with a palimpsest into a collective shift in medieval popular thinking about conversion, where the two 12th century texts present conversion as an event, baptism, that radically transforms an individual, allowing for immediate assimilation into the convert's new Christian community. The two 14th century narratives depict conversion as a socio-cultural process. And like baptism, this process, and therefore assimilation into the Latin Christian community, can take a long time to complete, and as in the case of Josiane, or as was Ascopard, never be fulfilled. As baptism and conversion are gradually dissociated from each other, baptism becoming merely one step amongst many on the path to assimilation into Christian society. Sorry. The need to differentiate between Christians and Saracens gains in urgency. Where the Song of Roland presents its readers with a relative absence of difference, the three later texts emphasize the physical, linguistic, and cultural factors that divide one group from the other. Interestingly, physical characteristics, particularly skin color, are ultimately displaced by linguistic and cultural attributes, while the principal visible point of difference between Christians and Saracens in the conquest of Orange lies in the Saracens' black skin. Beavis of Hampton shows much more concern in the behavior, habits, and customs of individual characters. Josiane, for example, can only be perceived as a true Christian when she renounces the associations, practices, and knowledge she acquired in the Saracen world of her birth. The replacement of hermeneutic blackness by primarily social and cultural phenomena signals a new way of thinking about conversion. This substitution also means that conversion is a more threatening prospect. We can no longer tell whether someone can integrate the Christian family simply by looking at them. This new approach to conversion as a socio-cultural process upon which the convert must expend time and effort illustrates a heightened anxiety about identity in late medieval England. To what extent can anyone convert to Christianity? Ascopard, for one, is too large to receive baptism. If conversion is unlikely or downright impossible for certain individuals, are whole communities to be barred from baptism? And the biggest questions of all, at what point does conversion begin and when does this long drawn-out process end? Are all conversions successful, or are some, like the Princess of Tars' nominal conversion to the Saracen faith, insincere? Can only those who were born Christian be trusted, and has Christianity become a race of sorts? Thank you so much, and I am so sorry that I went on for so long. I'm sure I've put everybody to sleep.
Well, I need to unmute myself to say no, that was not too long, and we really appreciate it. And I know that there's questions. Let's see, I saw one in the chat and the Q&A. And I want to get to those before I have my own question. And I also want to encourage people, if you're a panelist, you've got a microphone that works. If you put your hand up, if you got a raise hand icon, I will get to you. So Meriem, I would like to start with questions from the Q&A. There's one from Marie Duggan that says, that mentions the Song of Roland. You had a quote where the Frankish king describes the black Saracen and his white teeth, and says that he fears all Franks will die today. And she asks about the possibility that there's an interpretation that rather than disparaging the blackness, isn't that a compliment coming from one warrior to another?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I feel like we were just talking about that in my class this afternoon. Certainly there's a sense that I think what one of my students said, and they were making really great points. And so this is not my argument, but this is my student's excellent argument. The argument I think I remember them saying is that it seems that only the black warriors are going to be able to kill these amazing Frankish warriors. The white Saracen warriors are not going to cut it, but the black Saracen warriors might be able to do it. So I think in some ways there might be like a kind of compliment in disguise there. And and I'm going off of the question now, but it's the question of color and race in this new debate about race in the Middle Ages is a really complicated one. And again, I was just discussing this in part with my students recently. In her book, Geraldine Hang has a lot of trouble herself dealing with that, and she kind of waits a long time before she deals with the chapter on color and race. And I think part of what she's worrying about is that a lot of medievalists who have looked at race have looked at these representations of Black Africans or at least Black warriors, and so that's the focus there. But it's not clear. It's not clear exactly if these Black individuals are presented negatively for the same reasons that it would be presented negatively in, say, a text from, antebellum 19th century the South of the US, right? It's not clear, but it looks a lot like it could be that we could use the same terms and talk about this kind of language in the same way. But then there's all this other stuff that's going on with religion and with other people who are not portrayed as Black, and how do we reconcile that with what's going on with these specific characters? So I'm sorry, I'm going beyond Marie's question there, but it's a very difficult, and obviously I don't know how to talk about it either. That's why I'm getting rambly over my own words, but it's a very difficult kind of question to deal with, because I think part of the problem is that we are embedded in our own kind of thinking about race today, and then there's the Middle Ages, and there's obviously something going on in medieval Europe where medieval Christian Europeans, the dominant group looks at the other and says, oh, the other is wrong, and there's bad things about them for this and that reason. But they have a different mindset from our modern mindset. And so, even though there's a certain kind of discourse about race today, and there might be a discourse about race in the Middle Ages, are those two discourses the same? Do they line up in some ways but not others? Do they not line up at all? And of course, for several hundred years, medievalists have dealt with that by saying, we don't have to deal with race. It's a Renaissance problem. It's not our problem, And so it's only now that people are like, maybe we should really try to open that can of worms finally and accept that, yes, the Middle Ages does have race and racism, if that makes any sense.
Sure, no, very interesting and touches on a lot of things. Another question, Susan Wade, you had your hand up and you've been moved to a panelist status, so you can turn off.
I'm going to unmute myself.
There you go.
Meriem and I have had many conversations about this because, of course, I'm also a medievalist. And so, and there are problems with Geraldine Heng's assessment of the Jews, as we know. But what I want to really ask you is, you're really talking about the 14th century.
Mm-hmm.
You're only talking about the 14th century, so except for the Song of Roland, right? And you're making this comparison. And so what I am seeing here is that, if you think about the depiction of Saint Maurice in Mecklenburg, if you think about the depictions of the Queen of Sheba, and I'll describe this for people who are not medievalists, the depiction of Saint Maurice, who was understood to be an African man in Mecklenburg. He is depicted as an African man, right? And this is in the 13th century, right? This is 13th century art. And the Queen of Sheba, also in the 13th century, is depicted in Limoges caskets as being an African woman, as being Black, right? And so, and the Queen of Sheba is, incredibly seductive, a beautiful woman, Saint Maurice. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that the 14th century may be different. We may be seeing something that's beginning to happen in the 14th century that is not happening in the earlier Middle Ages.
And that's essentially my argument. And I'm so sorry if that was not coming through. And this first chapter is the chapter where I'm trying to say there's something different going on in the 14th century from what was happening earlier. And that's why I pick, and I know it's lazy. I know I wish I had more time and I could have done a more comprehensive, look at a wider variety of literature. But I kind of went the hang way and just kind of grabbed a few texts that kind of explain my points. And went with that, just was a limited time. So I know that was not the best research methodology, but I tried to look at these two 12th century texts, the Song of Roland, the Conquest of Orange, and then two texts that are very different in many ways, but also like are similar in that they conclude on the same image of this baptized Saracen queen, and then these 14th century texts that are doing they're going away from that. I've been trying to argue, and actually, your question, thank you so much for this great question, Susan, because it allows me to kind of talk about what my book project really is about, which is the Man of Law's Tale and the legend about Thomas Becket's Muslim mother, Saracen mother. And really, like, the legend is the story that kind of inspired this thesis about the 14th century as doing something different than what was happening before in terms of conversion, because the legend about Thomas Becket, who's an English saint from the late 12th century,
12th, 13th century, right?
And the legend is so he dies, what is it, 1170, right?
Yes, well, he was killed by Henry II's assassins, basically. Yeah, I mean, killed. He was assassinated in the Canterbury Cathedral, in the Cathedral of Canterbury, by Henry II's assassins. Yeah. So.
And a few days after Christmas too.
Oh, it was one day after Christmas. Yeah. Oh, maybe it was two. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm bad with dates. This is why I'm not.
I've been there. There's a big, huge sword. But anyway, I mean, we're gonna two medievalists are gonna get into something, and then we're. But go ahead.
But no, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, so he dies at the end of the 12th century. He's murdered in his cathedral at his altar at the end of the 12th century. Within 100 years, less than 100 years possibly, there's this story that is completely fictional and crazy that has emerged, that he had this Muslim mother who traveled all the way from Syria to get married to his father and have this wonderful, amazing child, Thomas Becket. Within less than 100 years, this story has assumed this really important place in the English imaginary and is seen as truth about Thomas Becket. And so that's happening in the 13th century. And as I started to look at the different manuscripts of the legend, what I noticed was that there was this important role that was given to this Saracen woman. But then at the end of the story does not end with her conversion. We don't get the baptism cum marriage that we get in the Song of Roland and the Conquest of Orange. Instead, it's kind of like the morning after. I told my student this. It's kind of like there's a morning after scene where they've been married. She's been baptized. They've been married. And then, I'm sorry, probably bored you with this, Susan, before. And then Thomas's father looks at her and he's like, basically like, crap, I can't do anything now because you can't talk English. Like, I can't let you out into society. Like, you're no good. This sucks. And then she's like, don't worry.
It's a totally apocryphal story. There's no way that could happen. And in fact,
no.
I'll just say one more thing. I'm teaching Islamic kingdoms right now. And so I just started, we just got to the invasion of Spain by the Islamic people, and how they married into the Visigothic Christians. And I'm like, look, in the beginning there's no difference, right? They're just like intermarrying so they can get some sort of power structure. That's the point, right? and I think we have to be really, aware of the difference between religions in this period and also the power structures. And by the time that you're dealing with in the 14th century, the power structure in Europe is totally Christian, right?
Yeah.
But it's not before that. There is some wiggle room down in the South. So anyway.
But in the 13th century, that legend led me down this road, because in the 13th century, suddenly we see this need for this scene where there is this dialogue between the new bride and bridegroom.
Yes.
And the dialogue, of course, ends with the bride being seen as becoming fully Christian. But suddenly there's this need to say, no, she really does assimilate. And it's as if baptism is no longer enough. That's
well, but it's so interesting, because I was just teaching this week about Christian women marrying into the Islamic power structure in Spain, and they converted too, right? And I guess I'm not negating what you're saying at all, Meriem. I'm just saying that, this period is so complex, and people don't really understand how complex it is, because they sort of think that, okay, Christians were here, Muslims were here, and Jews were sort of a little bit of a minority in everywhere. But in actuality, they were intermarrying, they were having alliances, it's far more complex than people really understand. So anyway,
absolutely agree with that.
I'm probably, way outside of your talk right now.
I'm going to say that Meriem, the talk was wonderful, but Susan, you provided me with the quote of the night, and that is two medievalists going at it. I've never seen that before. I just witnessed it. I've got two more questions.
Well, actually, medievalists never go at it. We're all my dissertation.
You have to give us long enough.
They're always
We'll get there.
kind to each other. So yeah, we don't go at it normally. But it was a great talk, Meriem, and I really appreciated it. I had one other question for you. What do you think of of Geraldine Hang's chapter on the Jews?
I think I probably said this to you before, Susan, sorry, but I think Geraldine Hang's work is not perfect. And I think the chapter on the Jews, I feel is in some ways the one where that she's articulated the most fully, but it's still very full of holes. At the same time, I feel like there's been so much backlash against her work, and especially against that chapter on the Jews in England. And I think, what's to me, like, I think the more important thing that a scholar can do is to raise questions, even if they don't have answers to them, even if they kind of approach the questions the wrong way. If they raise a question, they start a conversation. That personally, that's what I would like to do as a scholar, rather than kind of be able to give, the final word on anything. And I think she does that. She really starts a huge conversation. So does she do it perfectly? No. Are there holes in her arguments? Yes. But I feel like overall, the important thing is that she starts that conversation and she gets us going, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And thank you. I'll cede the floor.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
I'm gonna jump to a question that I see in the chat. It's from Anna Shore, and she wants to know how did Christian theologians of the period see Muslim conversion, but also how much did they shape the socio-cultural dimensions you trace? And conversely, and I think this sounds interesting, what did the Islamic world have to say about Christian baptism?
Those are great questions, Anna. Thank you. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to come close to addressing any one of them. I'll start with the last one. So the Islamic world, are you speaking of baptism of Muslims converting to Christianity, or Christians being baptized, Christians born to Christian families being baptized?
See, I think Anna is an attendee, so she won't be able to. Well, I can unmute her.
It's like, because
Anna, can you unmute?
Oh, hi, Miriam.
Hi, Anna.
I was just, thanks for the great talk. It's just really a curiosity question. I was wondering even more specifically if there was a difference between how Muslim communities in Europe react to baptism. Was there any pushback from them? Like Jews didn't particularly, they had all kinds of tensions and anxieties about conversion. So was there any difference between how Islamic Muslim communities in Europe see baptism and the kind of the Islamic world at large outside of Europe? Did they even I mean, how much of an issue was that? I mean, was there any anxiety or insecurity or hostility or some sort of more positive response to what you're describing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, the areas that I deal with more are England and then France to a certain degree. And there's really no Muslim community until much, much later. And really, I don't know that you can really speak of a Muslim community either in England or France until after the end of the Middle Ages.
Okay.
But then there are other areas like Spain and Syria.
Spain, right. Okay, I see. So that's just not it's not the geography, not the right geography. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, and this is what, this is connected to what Susan was saying too. So on the one hand, and this is where Geraldine Hang is doing something so different when she's talking about the racialization of the Jews than when she's talking about the racialization of Muslims, because the Jews, are communities in these places, at least until 1290 in England when they're expulsed. But so Jewish communities in Western European territories are really marginalized communities, whereas when Western Europeans are talking about Muslims, they're talking about people that they really mostly don't see and who have their own empire and their own power structure, to use Susan's phrase. So that's a very different kind of way of imagining the other, I think. And I think that's part of what was problematic maybe in some ways about Hang's work, is that she tried to bring all of these others in one work. But really, there's a very different way, I think, of imagining the other, when that other is, right, I don't know, your neighbor and at the mercy of the Christian king, than from imagining the Muslim other way over there who is, going to fight you if you try to baptize him by force. So there's that kind of difference. And of course, in Islam, I mean, those questions are very clear. Like in Islam, you cannot convert from Islam to another religion. That is punishable by death. And as for marriage, that also is very clear. A Muslim man can marry a woman who is Jewish or a woman who is Christian. And that woman, though often in history they did end up converting, but technically does not have to convert, because those are faiths that are they are people of the book, and so as such, they can hold on to their faith, and then presumably any children issued from the union will become Muslim. So all of these things are codified much more, I think, in Islam than they are in Christianity, where it's a lot vaguer in Christianity, especially where Muslims are concerned, I think. And that this is kind of going to the first part of your question about Christian theologians. The Muslim theologians have kind of a script they can go back to, whereas Christian theologians have to kind of make it up as they go along. And the question about Muslim conversion and Christian theologians is also very important and very interesting, because and again, this is something I tell my students all the time, what we see happening is that the Pope and the Church until 1095, until the end of the 11th century, are really emphasizing that killing is wrong and killing is always reprehensible, no matter what the circumstances. Even, self-defense or an accident, you still have to do penance for those crimes. If you've taken a life, you have to do penance no matter what. And then in 1095, the Pope develops the concept of crusading, and Susan's nodding. and then once the Pope
Well,
wants
I'm just gonna weigh in here. It's like a totally new idea that just, it comes from, it seems to come from nowhere, and I worked with, my mentor at NYU, was a crusade scholar, and she said the same thing. This idea comes from nowhere, and she had worked with Peters at UPenn, so it's a very bizarre idea, but yeah, it comes from nowhere. So I'm muting now.
And the idea that both Susan and I are talking about is that suddenly it's okay to kill Saracens, and the change is not immediate, but in the speech that announces and advertises the First Crusade, the Pope at the time, Pope Urban II, says probably says, we don't actually have his account, but we have later renditions of it, and he seems like he says it's a lesser crime to kill a Saracen. So this is a big change in terms of the thinking from the church. Sorry, Susan, I think you wanted to say something.
About baptized.
Oh, no, I didn't want to say, I just said, yeah, we have several versions of that speech. We don't know what he said, but it's absolutely, a new concept, and it seems to come from nowhere, because it doesn't even, relate to what Gregory VII was saying. So, and I'm not going to go into that. So because it would be very boring for everyone. Yeah, it's very bizarre.
And the goal there is not conversion, to go back to your question, Anna, the goal is not conversion. In fact, once the Crusaders make it to Jerusalem, they kill everyone. They don't just kill the Muslims, they kill the Jews in the city, they kill the Christians in the city, they kill absolutely everyone. So conversion is not on the table. And then in the Song of Roland, there's some talk of conversion there, which is from around the same time, but not in the actual history. So I don't know if we've answered your question at all, Anna, but just to.
I was just curious. Yeah, you have.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You've also made me terribly uncomfortable, because I just realized that I'm sitting here smiling, listening to you guys talk, while the things that you're saying are, he kills everyone, and it's just completely uncheerful subject matter, but completely interesting exchange to watch. And
this is what medievalists do.
It's been enough time, so you can smile.
But we tend to sort of try to break it at about 7:30, and we're just about there. So I guess I'd want to end by encouraging people to follow up with Meriem if they're interested, or Susan, and also to thank you very much for such a different flavored presentation, and to say we really appreciate tonight's talk and all the questions that came after, and I really do encourage people to follow up later on if they're interested.
And
So,
Wes, I never answered your question, so maybe I'll just email you. And thank you so much for all of the other questions, Anna and Susan and everybody. Thank you so much, Marie.
Yep. So thank you. And I guess we'll see you all and next week. And again, thank you, Meriem and Kirsty, for your very nice introduction. Good night.
Thank you so much.
See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.